What I'll kind of go over today is the study that we've been hired to work on. Just to kind of give you all just a quick little history of what's going on here is the Athens Hocking Solid Waste Management District had recently, the last year or so, approved their solid waste management plan. They have to update that every 3 to 5 years. Ohio EPA, it's a requirement that they have to do. And in that solid waste planning process, that there was public comment periods in both counties and a whole process they have to go through with checks and balances and approvals. The district had identified that their current recycling facility down here in Athens County was kind of at its capacity, both from ability to take material as well as from a technology standpoint, to be able to grow and adapt to what the marketplace is asking for and needing and services provided. And so they had went through this process to plan to upgrade that facility. They approved a generation fee of $3 per ton on e-waste that's generated in this county, no matter where it goes in Ohio. $3 per ton would be collected and would help fund the capitalization and operation of that facility, as well as maybe some other programs. In the process of that planning process, there was some concern during the ratification process that maybe that's not what the entire district wanted to have happen or not, and so as a kind of an agreement between the district and Ohio EPA, they agreed that a study would be done to make sure that this facility was feasible and was needed in the community in this district, the two-county district, Hocking and Athens. And so that was built into the findings and orders from the director of Ohio EPA. Actually, it was kind of interesting to see something like that in that findings, but that's where it was put. And so the board solicited proposals for various consultants to conduct this study. And so that's where we are. And my name is, by the way, Jim Score again from GT Environmental, and we were hired to do the study. Now, I want to say that the essence of our proposal and what we're going to present to you tonight is really to determine whether it's feasible economically and from a market standpoint to either take their facility and upgrade it or build a whole new facility. So that's really our purpose, and the way we look at doing these type of studies is to look at these facilities as standalone facilities and go through all the economics and all the flow and what's going on in the community. And so we did a lot of process. And so I'm going to go over that with you today briefly with this PowerPoint presentation. But the real purpose of why we're here is to hear comments about the study primarily that we can bring back to two governing bodies. There's a policy committee that represents both counties, the solid waste district in and of itself. The solid waste district of the Athens and Hocking counties is actually one government agency between the two counties. Then you have the board of directors, which are actually the county commissioners for both counties. That's the other governing board. So your comments, our study, the results of the study have been presented to them in draft form already, and will be presented to them, and I'll show you the schedule here in a little bit, in another month or so as a final version, and then they'll have what they need to make their decisions. So it's an important process. They decided they wanted to have a public meeting. We had a public meeting last week in Hocking County at the high school there, and then tonight here in Athens County. So once I get done talking, and you can ask questions, and if you want to stop me and ask questions, that's fine. If someone has formal comments that they want to make, we can certainly, give the name, rank, and serial number and make your formal comments. The last meeting was more of a question and answer, back and forth kind of process, and again, the whole purpose here is to make sure we collect and capture your comments and ideas about this study and to help us out. So that's kind of the roadmap of what we're going to do tonight. The study that we designed is broken up into 7 sections, and I'm going to go over each one of these in brief tonight, just to give you a flavor of the process we went through to come up with our recommendations and show you how we conducted our analysis. So obviously there's an introductory section, and then section 2 is really important. It was where we collect a lot of information about what's going on in the district as far as recycling goes, where the recyclables are going, where they're coming from. Hey, Ed. All right. Hey. We have a distinguished gentleman here, Ed Newman. retired. So we collect a lot of information throughout the two-county area as far as where material is being recycled, where it's going. Not everything goes to the Athens Hocking Recycling Center. So that was all important. We wanted to know where, if material was leaving the district, where it was going, and so on and so forth. Section 3 was a recycle market study. We wanted to make sure that we understood, because part of the analysis we do, and I'll show you here soon, is that when you run a recycling facility, you're basically creating revenues. A couple different ways to create revenues, but the primary source for the facility is through the sale of the materials that come in. So we have to process them, break them out into different commodities. And so we did a recycle market study on all the various commodities that the district would sell that material, so we can kind of understand the ups and downs, just like grain and corn. Plastic and glass all go through the same kind of open market cycles. Section 4, we talk about what we do is we look at comparable facilities. I'll show you the facilities that we looked at from a public and private sector, so we can kind of understand how they do their operations. The way we do our analysis is, we're not putting out bid specs and soliciting proposals on pieces of equipment and building sizes and stuff when we're doing a feasibility study at this level. So we want to know how other facilities that have developed and upgraded their facilities, how they operate, what their costs for development were for their operational expenses and revenues, how their material flows to them, so on and so forth. So we cover that in that area. Contracts and designation are kind of a district thing as far as rules and what the ORC allows districts to maneuver in solid waste management. So we have a section that talks about that. We do our economic analysis in section 6, and I'll show you those different scenarios that we ran, and then our conclusions and recommendations. So that's kind of the lay of the land of the study. Again, any questions, just jump right in. So section 2, what we're looking at is the curbside programs, drop-off programs, what is being handled by the recycling facility here currently. We also went out to the business community on a targeted survey to ask them on the commercial side, some industrial and institutional, what they're recycling, where they're sending the material, obviously the volumes, things of that nature. Some of that surveying is still in progress, but we're wrapping that up fairly quickly. And then our comparable facilities for the material recovery facilities, or MRFs, what we like to call them. And then a kind of a new concept, and the district wanted us to look at this recycling transfer station concept, where instead of processing the material locally, we would consolidate that material and ship it to more of a regional facility out of the district area. And so we call that a recycling transfer station. So we've got a couple of those that we looked at as well. Some quick numbers just to kind of show you. This is the residential commercial recycling from the period 07 through 11 for the district. And again, just what's generated in the district here between Athens and Hocking County. And you can kind of see the growth from 07, around a couple thousand tons all the way up to almost 7,000 tons. So it's been significant growth. Some of that is related to data collection. A lot of it's related to program growth and program expansion over the years. But clearly an upward growth. When we look at the type of materials that are in the residential commercial sector, primarily cardboard and paper and glass, this is fairly consistent with what we see across the state, unlike your industrial numbers, that I'll talk about here soon. But you kind of see the lay of the land as far as what is in the programs that are being serviced, either by the district or elsewhere, that are being recycled. So about 47%, the largest component is cardboard. That makes a lot of sense. A lot of that coming from the commercial and institutional sectors, and then all the rest of the materials. The industrial sector was showing a gradual climb, in a couple thousand ton range, and then we had a big drop in 2011. We'll have to see what the 2012 numbers are. We had a large manufacturer that kind of ceased operations or scaled back operations, and so that clearly, when you're only talking about a couple thousand tons here, can certainly take a swipe out of the numbers. But we're still double checking. We'll see where 12 leads us. What is interesting to me is how that material is broken out for the industrial sector. Normally what we see is ferrous metals is the largest component in the industrial waste stream. Here it's still cardboard. So the manufacturers down here are obviously of a different mixture not good or bad, just different than what most districts in the industrial sector are. So there's lots of cardboard, still a good selection or a good component of ferrous metals and non-ferrous metals, which is what we would expect, and then some of the other materials in there. So when we look at a kind of a mirrored up graphic, the darker color is of the materials that are collected is what the Athens Hocking Recycling Center processes, and then the green or the lighter color is the rest of the district that goes elsewhere. So you can kind of see the district, for the most part, processes about half, and we'll see the numbers here in a minute. Some commodities it's more than half, and some commodities not quite as half of that. But obviously the Athens Hocking Solid Waste District is a major player in this marketplace, but it's not the only player. Part of the reason we wanted to look at this, not only for us to become educated and understand what's going on in the market, but also see where there's room for growth, where there's not room for growth, and how the flow of material trash and recyclables is very interesting if you're ever involved in it. For those of you that may be involved, it's very interesting how trash and recyclables flows based on dollars, based on economics, and collection and service providers. So it's always interesting, but it's important for us to understand that matrix here in this two-county solid waste district. You can see some of the numbers broken out again from 7 to 11. The split out, the residential commercial sector about 6,000 tons or so. And this is we pulled out some other type materials like yard waste and things that we're not looking at for this recycling facility. So there are actually some larger numbers out there for each of these categories, but this is the standard stuff: the paper, glass, cardboard, metals. And you kind of see that in this graphic here. There's about 12,000 total tons of recycling in the residential commercial sector. Again, that includes the yard waste and tires and wood and some other materials that aren't typically handled at a material recovery facility. Your largest component of what the solid waste district handles is the city of Athens and Ohio University. It's about 80-some-odd% of what they accept in there, and then some other subscription tonnage from areas in the district as well. And then, like I said, there's some material that the district doesn't handle, and it doesn't go to a traditional type facility like ash, and yard waste goes to a compost facility, and food, tires go to separate processors that handle tires. So those are things that we didn't look at for this study because it's not something that a normal material recovery facility would handle. So that's it on data. Some of that's still in progress. Again, it's all a building process for us to understand what's going on in the district. That all helps us out. This next section that we talk about is the material or the recycling market study. And we look at all the major commodities that are represented on the screen. And we look at what we want to do is see the fluctuation over time. We have current market pricing from January of this year, and you do have seasonal influences. You know, the Chinese stop buying stuff and markets drop, and you know, you have the economy. Obviously, we're just coming through a pretty serious recession that has definitely affected the markets. So you have a lot of different things going on, but it's important for us. And I just have a couple graphs to show you. This is number 6 news. And you kind of see the flow of the prices and how they can spike, you know, on day-to-day or a couple-day or week time period, and they can be very consistent over certain periods of time, and so they do fluctuate. And we wanted to know this for our projections that we're going to show you here on revenue, because again, that's one of the biggest portions of operating a facility is the revenue that is obtained through the sale of those recyclables on the open market. And again, the key is it is an open market. Prices do change, and so here we have as high as almost 90-some-odd dollars all the way down to $30 a ton on newspaper. So you can see the swing. The historic highs and historic lows we've looked at before. We're not going to represent those in our projections. We're going to kind of show a 20% swing either way, but I mean, we had cardboard down to nothing, you know, 07, 08 when the market dropped, and it's sold as high as $150 a ton. So you can go from 0 to 150, and those are unrealistic areas. They didn't stay there that long. There is a sweet spot in some of these commodities, and some of them there aren't. This next one is aluminum. This is on price per pound, and aluminum is probably one of the most consistent waste streams, but it still has fluctuation, 20-30 cents a pound here, again, depending on the markets. This is all from Waste News and the Chicago Board of Trade. So It's important that we know these numbers. Not all the time you will get these numbers because it depends who you're dealing with. If Roger's dealing with a broker and that broker's dealing with a broker, well, they're all taking cuts. Waste Management, largest waste company in the world, they've got some buying power. They deal in tens of thousands. Rumpke, they have their facility down in Cincinnati is 80 to 100,000 tons a year of recyclables in that process, just in that facility, and besides Columbus and Dayton and others. We're talking 3,000 tons here. So, I mean, the buying power that Roger has is not going to be the same as Rumpke or Waste Management, so the prices will vary depending on where you're selling. So that was an important exercise we went through. This next section was, again, to look at these comparables, and we tried to look at a mixture of publicly and privately owned and operated facilities across Ohio as well as outside of Ohio to give us a good understanding of how they developed, the capital that they expensed, the size of their facilities, equipment they purchased, how they staffed their facilities, what their profit and loss is for their facilities, what are their revenue sources, how do they subsidize their facilities, all of that. Do they participate in open market, or are they in a closed market? Are they a major service provider? And so you can see the list across the board. We like publicly owned facilities because the data is relatively available. We ask Mr. Rumpke how he's making his money, and he may not share that with us, and understandably he's a private company. But the public has to give us the information, so it gives us a good handle about facilities that are in comparable range of tonnage per year handled, how they operate, and what their costs were for developing and operating a facility. So that's important. These are the facilities we looked at.
Do you include trash hauling?
No. No, this is a recycling study only. We also want to look at some transfer stations that I mentioned earlier. These are something that are just starting to kind of take hold. And as I explained to the board of directors and the policy committee, the governing law that the solid waste district operates under is House Bill 592. It came into existence in 1988 because there was a landfill shortage. There was a disposal capacity shortage in Ohio less than 10 years. We have 35 years of capacity now. We had over 100 small landfills back in '88. We have like 35 big landfills for the most part, some small ones, but mostly big landfills. Point of what I'm trying to say is our landfills have evolved to regional facilities, and now what we're seeing in the recycling market on whole, or on average, is the same kind of process. And so because in trash or recycling, it's all about volume, it's all about frequency. And there's other factors as well, but those are key, volume and frequency. And so what we see in the smaller markets for recycling is some of our joint solid waste districts and fellow solid waste districts are looking at this transfer station operation as a way to cost effectively move material to a more larger regional facility that maybe will offer better pricing versus getting involved in the business of recycling. So there's a couple examples there that we're looking at, and then we have some revenue sharing operations that we're looking at as well, where such as the city of Akron, where they ship their material. They don't have a MRF, but they shift the material to a local facility, and they share in the revenue. So we wanted to understand how that works as well. As I kind of alluded to, we look at how these facilities are laid out, how they're what we describe how that facility works, the staffing, their developmental costs, operational cost, capacity, the prices that they got paid for materials, because they may not always match up with the market prices from the Chicago Board of Trade, and how the materials flow to them, because it's either, again, if you build it, they will come kind of scenario to like we have here, where the district actually picks a lot of the material up.
Did you check what the district got paid as well? Did you check what this district got paid as well?
On the collection side, yes, we'll talk about that. Yes, and that's an integral part of how this thing can work, is having that collection revenue.
I mean, per each.
Oh yeah, it is. Yes. Okay. Contracts and designation. These are just different things that the district, from an operational standpoint, from a legal standpoint, we put into a lot of our studies so that the board of directors understands what their abilities are to enter into contracts, to designate facilities, to look at their district rules, collection, recycles, other legal issues. So this is kind of an internal section for the board of directors, primarily because they're the ones in charge for implementing a solid waste plan. So we it's a small section, but it does describe their contractual and ORC authority on operating facilities. And there's a lot of powerful stuff in the ORC that was thought of back in 1988 when they put House Bill 592 in place, and we just thought it was germane to this project that the board of directors understands all of those capabilities and legal type things. So that's in that section there. Section 6 is the economic analysis. So what we did is we wanted to look at, again, when we looked at all the tonnages were out there, what the district's currently accepting is about 3,400 tons of material currently, and it's maxed out in its operations. And we also looked at, okay, we know that about twice the amount of material is being recycled in the residential commercial sector in total, including the district, is about 7,000 tons. And then there's obviously room for growth. There's more material that could be generated when we look at the waste composition studies from, we're just conducting one in Franklin County ourselves. ODNR has done a couple in the past, as well as the US EPA. And we look at what's in the waste stream. There's a lot more material that's going to the landfill that's not being diverted through recycling programs. So we looked at 3,400 tons current, and then 6, 8, and 10,000 tons as far as areas to grow. We also looked at a couple scenarios for the transfer station, 3,400 to current, and then 6,000, which would be approximately doubling their tonnage. So we have 6 scenarios, and then we have, within those 6 scenarios, 3 revenue projections. And that kind of goes back to that market study, which is the current price, what those commodities were selling for in January, and then a 20% high and a 20% low. So we kind of see a swing. So the exercise here is to show that you're not going to have a consistent revenue stream to operate that facility as a standalone facility. Prices do go up and down. You can certainly negotiate with brokers or end users of the materials sent to Lucas County. That's why we put them as a comparable. They were kind of pioneers from a solid waste district standpoint to negotiate ceiling and floor prices with their vendors up in Michigan. Not Lucas, no. They're more of the city of Toledo. But they are intimately involved in collecting recyclables and a drop-off program and operating their own facilities. So they're a little bit higher tonnage than significantly higher tonnage, but that revenue sharing and that ceiling and floor contract was important.
How many of those MRFs were in the same tonnage range as what you're looking at?
All of them. Just about all. A couple of them are a little bit higher. But the data is good for us to understand on the averages, and I'll show you some of the reasons why we look at those. But we tried to choose, between a 3 and 6, 3 and 8,000 ton range. There's a couple a little bit higher, a couple a little bit lower. But it's important to see how those facilities develop, how they operate in their marketplaces, and what kind of costs they incur to develop their facilities. This is that same kind of breakout of the materials that the district currently handles, 46% of cardboard. You saw these numbers before. This is what we're going to base our revenue projections on. We also base some of our capital assumptions and land and building assumptions on our comparable facilities. So we broke all that down into averages.
But no actual quotes were
No, not for this type of study.
Would you go back a slide for a second? You mentioned a few minutes ago that there's room for growth from diverting material from landfills. Is that waste characterization similar to this, or will growth come with a different distribution?
To give you an example, let's see if I can answer this properly. The last study that was done statewide looked at a variety of different landfills and the composition. About 41% of the waste going to a landfill was fiber related. So they included cardboard, paperboard, newspaper, office paper, newspaper, all the way down the line. Obviously 46% of what is being accepted in the recycling program is cardboard, so you can't compare those numbers directly, but 40% just in fiber alone. And that's the biggest component, about 15% yard waste, which is what this facility would accept, and it drops off from there. Metals are fairly low because they've always been recycled, and there's pretty good markets, long-standing markets for metals, but still a lot of fiber going into the landfill right now. So there's lots of room for growth. Whether you can get that into programs or not isn't the purpose of this study, but it is something we have to pull out and say, okay, there is room for growth, but that doesn't mean it's just out there for the taking. You have to develop those programs. It has to be cost effective. You got to be able to collect it. You got to be able to process it. So those are all important pieces.
I'm surprised the plastics are so low. As often as we use plastics to store, food commodities, things like that, because both the two types of plastic are both under 3%. Is that unusual?
No, it's not, because they're light. They take space up, but they're light. And so this is based on volume. So the heavier stuff is gonna rule the day. But you're right. There's a lot of things in plastic, but they are very light, and so they don't make up a big portion of the waste stream.
Also, a lot of plastic isn't picked up by it, so.
Correct. Yeah, the 3 through 7s don't always get caught up into a program. It's usually the 1s and 2s.
That's you mentioned that. That's a problem. That's one of the reasons I came to that, because a lot of times they don't take the plastic we set up.
And we're doing another study for another client that wants to incorporate this plastic to oil program where they can take all the plastics and other materials as well, and through a pyrolysis process that they're doing on a small bench scale now, turn that into a usable oil product. And so they can take those other materials, and whether that can be commercialized or not, we'll see what happens. But there are other applications too.
Yeah, once you flush and milk, it doesn't take much time.
Right.
You know,
And it doesn't
put
weigh
it
that
there,
much.
it goes out the bin and it gets flushed. There.
I mean, plastics are worth, $300-400 a ton between the two, class 1 and 2, but it takes a lot to make a ton. And you got to have a good baling system, like your 1940 style pit balers probably wouldn't like it too well. Good questions, though. Thank you. And so when we looked at these other cost capital assumptions, again, coming off our comparables, they're important for us to understand. We feel pretty confident based on what other people have done. We're not projecting, we're basing it off of real numbers, what they had done. And even recent, and that's why we look at the one facility, I don't know if you caught it, is Grand Rapids, Michigan. It's probably the newest public facility in this multi-state region that's like a single stream, but it's a 30,000 ton a year facility, taking about 15 right now. They over capacity.
30,000 tons is a lot more than the 10,000 ton range.
It absolutely is, but they're the newest facility, so there's good information there. We don't rely all our information on that, but it's good information for a modern facility. Wood County just upgraded their facility in Bowling Green. That's back in that 3,000-4,000 ton range, and they went from a multi-stream to a single stream, so we have good data from them as well.
Is your data looking at dual or single stream parks?
Both.
So if you're looking
But we're
at,
focusing on single stream.
okay, so you're focusing on single stream, then are you adjusting for the idea that single streams will have dirtier commodities than dual streams, and that dual streams often get more per ton on the market?
There are slight variances. I mean, good single stream facilities that are operated properly make just as clean materials dual stream. Now, when you talk about mixed waste processing, now that's a different story. Their material is much dirtier. Mixed waste means garbage and trash together. We're not talking about that here, but dual stream and single stream are pretty comparable on the prices that they're getting. Again, it's really hard because you got people, you could be dealing with 2 brokers here, and somebody could be dealing with a direct end user. So we have to, that's why we use averages, because every situation is going to be a little bit different. So you can't say, oh, they're a single stream, so they're getting less prices when they're only 2,000 tons and they're going through 2 brokers, so they're not going to get the best price.
Well, different operating costs.
Sure.
And different cleanliness of product and offsets for paying for excess waste to be landfilled.
These new systems are pretty good. I got grant money for a district over in North Central Ohio that just converted from dual stream to single stream. Once they got everything fine-tuned and all the decks right and all the elevations right and the speeds right on the belts and so on and so forth, they're churning pretty good. And
So would you say that the facility you're envisioning with these cost points up here, is that a single stream facility?
yeah, there's about a 10, 15%, 20% bump on the expenses on the capital side because you need a few more pieces of equipment, some disc screens, and a couple other things. You got to handle glass a certain way on the front end primarily.
Like lower employees.
You certainly have a lot less employees. Any other questions? Good questions.
less employees because there's less involved in pickup? Or,
We're only looking at the processing. We don't look at the collection side other than the revenue. So to operate the
You
facility.
wouldn't have people manually sorting things.
I mean, the way they're operating the current facility, I do know this. I mean, they're double handling stuff. They got stuff in cubic yard. I mean, no disrespect at all to the operations. It grew grassroots to its maximum capacity now, but they're handling stuff in they have very old equipment. They're moving stuff between buildings. I mean, they're doing the best they can with what they have. Clearly, they need to upgrade their technology and their efficiencies to be able to handle more material. I mean, they're maxed out right now. So you can operate probably with less people than what they're operating now, but they do share. I mean, they have collection going on, so it's a little more complicated in this model here because they have one person 8 hours a day just on processing. They share back and forth between the collection.
even less employees on processing?
For these newer systems, yeah.
Okay, I misunderstood you.
Now you grow, you need more, more employees. You might need more employees than you need now if they're going to take in more material. But we're going to talk about the flow of material because it's easy to talk about what's available out there, but you still got to get it. And they have a couple contracts, but we're going to talk about that. This chart just kind of shows when we apply those percentages and we apply the 20% high and low, the swing in the price you can get paid per ton. And again, these are just for projection purposes. This isn't an audited P&L statement that we're going to show you here in a few minutes. This is for feasibility purposes. And so we want to make sure that we're covering highs and lows and averages to show what a typical facility would run at for what you're looking at doing. But we do want to show the wide range of revenue that we can receive based on market pricing. They can certainly be higher or lower. This is just a nice swing. And so you can kind of...
The generic marketing, these are not from what the district actually received in 2012.
No, but they're in this range. So you can see for paper, the current sorted office paper, $150 a ton is current, but we show between 120 and 180 per ton. All right, so here's our summary of the economic models that we ran. Again, our 6 scenarios, the 4 on the material recovery facilities, 2 on a transfer station. It's a very busy, there's a lot of focus. Chart, but it does show interesting information. So what we have here is our 3 revenue scenarios, the tonnage that the scenario is processing, the revenues just for the commodities for that tonnage, broken out into category, the percentages that we assumed, and then the projected annual expenses. Now the top one here is not a scenario, it's the actual operations of the facility, current facility of $304,000 in revenue, $722,000 in expenses, so they're at $418,000 loss, or 57%, 58% loss. All of these scenarios are standalone facilities. Most of the time when we do these studies, our clients are not involved in the collection of material. Material comes to them. Here it's kind of a mixture, but primarily it comes from the collection of the material from the district. And so all of the scenarios, even regardless of the high tonnage scenarios, and even the transfer station operations, as a standalone facility, the high and low revenue projections and the current revenue projections are at a loss. Now, we throw in the collection revenue that the district has, because it's 2 primary contracts with the City of Athens and Ohio University. That's about $442,000. I had to take out certain numbers that aren't related to collection. And so the district currently shows on its current operation about $24,000 profit for last year. And so we kind of show this over time with the different scenarios of the collection revenue going up. Obviously, if you're more material, you're assuming more collection revenue. That's not a given. But I wanted to I've changed these charts a little bit since we've last seen them, Roger, and some of the other folks, to be a little more realistic in, okay, if we're increasing collection, we're going to have, if we're increasing tonnage, we're going to have increased, you assume, increased collection revenue. And then our generation fees, then that new generation fee that was passed through this last solid waste plan, which is additional revenue for the district to use for this facility. Of course, there'll be capital cost as you saw, upwards of a couple $1 million or more, depending on which size the facility you're going to build and operate. And there's other factors that go into that as far as whether you're buying used equipment, new equipment, whether you use existing facilities or new facilities. But on average, you know, you're going to have a capital investment that you're going to have to retire. So a portion of that generation fee could be used for that as well. So when we look down the first cash flow option, we're all negative. We throw our collection revenue into it. And I want to preface that now we turn most of these into positives. There's a couple that are negatives. The important part I wanted to stress, and the first couple times I showed this chart, I didn't want to show the collection revenue in there because it's not a given. The contracts that the district has right now expire next June, both of them. I'm sorry, in 2014. Next June, not this one. And so, those were openly competitive process that the district had to bid on. The district doesn't get those contracts, you lose a lot of revenue. And obviously would lose tonnage as well. And so there are many things here to be concerned about when you're planning to invest and build a facility is, can you get those contracts? Those are major, and those are a very important part of this process. And so obviously the city of Athens and their program seem to be happy, and then Ohio University, I think they'd like to see the district step up. I mean, from my conversations, I think with your old boss, Ed, they're looking for the district to kick it up a notch with technology and capability in order to satisfy the university's needs. Right now, the university has to process a portion of their material on their own that the district can't handle. And so that's an irritation to them, I'm sure, and they'd probably not want to be involved.
Those numbers aren't counted in here.
What's that?
Those numbers aren't counted in what's collected.
The collection revenues are. But again, once you get past the current, all bets are off. These are for projection purposes only, but there aren't any new contracts out there for another couple $100,000 that we know of. I mean, maybe if Logan, something like that, but outside of that, there's nothing out there that's going to be, another $100,000 or $200,000 more in revenue for the district to obtain.
Is that collection revenue, collection expense there, is that recycling and trash?
No, just recycling. We didn't do anything with the trash. They got a whole nother $600,000 or $700,000 on the trash side from revenues that include tipping fees and other things. So, but we're not doing trash, just recyclables. Even though they do share, and we had to break out the employees between trash and recycling so we could cost account as best we could what is happening on the recycling side only. So I'm not here to talk about trash.
Well, wouldn't the avoided cost of disposal play into this at some
Absolutely.
point?
And that's why we tip, that's a double-edged sword, because the generation fee, I projected some lower numbers on generation fee revenue, because if you're tapping into material that's currently being landfilled that comes out of landfill, then you don't get fees off that. So I've adjusted that. Obviously, there's that a cost avoidance mainly for the clients, for the customers. I mean, they have a cost avoidance to recycling. To the district, it's all revenue and expenses. And they make money on the trash side. They make more money on the trash side than they do on recycling. That's pretty typical in the marketplace in general. I don't think Rumpke would 100% disagree. They probably make more money on trash than recycling, but it can depend on markets. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think there's a lot of money in trash. Yes, sir.
We have data on how much potential there is for getting an cardboard and aluminum and glass from the entire district over and above or compared with OU and
That's why we chose those 6, 10, 8, and 10,000. There's potential there. But you got to have programs and or operations to draw that material out. Otherwise, it's going to go to the landfill because it's the cheapest option, unfortunately. But there is potential. There's probably potential greater than 8 or 10,000 tons, but we have to be realistic. And I could do projections up to 20, 30,000 tons, but you have to be realistic of what you can actually collect. And I look at what other districts are doing in high-performing districts and the percent that they're diverting from the waste stream, and we have to look at those numbers as kind of what's realistic for those type of programs. We have good programs down here in Athens County. There's not as many up in Hocking County, so you can see a difference between the two counties, but you have the same thing in different districts around the state and out of the state.
Where are the best performing levels going on?
You know, it's really interesting because what EPA's made it really hard to determine because they combine the residential commercial sector together. So I have solid waste districts that, like Cuyahoga County, is a mother load of trash in the state. There's 59 political subdivisions there, and 58 of them have curbside recycling. The EPA will be standing, Andrew Booker will stand right here and say, we got to have curbside recycling. There's 58 of them. Their goal to meet 25% is like 600,000 or 700,000 tons to make the 25% diversion. Their curbside programs recycle 40,000 tons. So the difference, and they do meet the goal. So the difference is on the commercial sector, which is the cardboard and all those other materials that come from the commercial businesses. So you'd say, okay, you have 58 political subdivisions and they're doing really good, they're urbanized, you know, there's lots of competition, there's good education awareness, they perform pretty well. The best programs that work are where there's economic incentives, hands down. When I say economic incentives, our businesses that pay by the ton to get rid of their material know that every ton that they reduce, either through cost avoidance or from recycling programs, and or both, will reduce their bottom line. So they have an incentive to recycle. Us, we were just talking, the price here in Athens is 12 bucks for one can and 16 bucks for a couple cans, and then $4 for recycling. And that's pretty standard. Those type of programs will divert between 10, maybe 20% of the materials in that residential sector. We're just talking about the residential sector of the town, 10 to 20%. You put an economic incentive program, what they call pay-as-you-throw or a volume-based program. In other words, residents would say, okay, my recycling's free, and I have different prices for trash containers. So the higher the container, the bigger the container, the more I pay. So if I recycle more, I need to pay less on my trash. And now I see an economic incentive to do that. Those programs divert 15, 20, 30, 35, 40% diversion because of the economic incentive. And there are pockets of those programs throughout the state and country, pay as you throw. Economic incentive, and EPA is very big on this, and so are we. Economic incentives work.
Is that factored into any of these figures you're giving us? Because that's something, I put out trash in once a month because I compost and recycle. And I've often thought there must be some sort of economic incentive here for people like myself who put out trash so frequently.
Right.
Are any of these projections based
By showing the higher volumes, say if you picked up Logan on a curbside program, you converted Athens to pay as you throw, you picked up a couple other townships or villages in the two counties, that's all going to get you closer to those higher numbers than what you're recycling now. I think Athens is what, 1,800 tons now. So if you doubled that through the pay as you throw program, 4,000 tons, you know, a couple more thousand tons, you know, if you added Logan and they were 1,000 or 1,500 tons, I mean, that's how you get to 8 or 10, you know, or closer to those numbers, yeah, definitely. I mean, there's ways to grow the current programs and there's ways to get new volume from not programs that don't exist.
What about also expanding to other commodities? There's other commodities in waste that are not.
Absolutely. And that's the, you know, a lot of the things going on right now are, you know, making sure you have magazines and the paperboard, looking at plastics 3 through 7. Obviously, some programs don't take cardboard at the curb because of its handling. It's bulky. It's hard to handle. Obviously, all the rest of the commodities are pretty standard. So you can take some of those additional things on top. And then there's the whole next generation of materials you can take, like in the plastics area. You know, the kids' toys and stuff. That's all recyclable plastic. But MRFs are not set up to handle those kind of materials. You know, a big wheel coming down the conveyor belt, they're just not set up for that. But that stuff's all highly recyclable. The new technologies that are coming out, and they're still bench testing, they're still not proven. And I have my Jefferson Belmont client that wants to do this so bad. But, you know, you got to see these things work first on a commercial basis. But they can handle those plastics. They got to be granulated up. But they can handle those types of 3 through 7 plastics. That opens up a whole nother arena of material that currently isn't being recycled. Sir?
My eyes aren't as good as they used to be. When I look at the adjusted profit and loss column, it looks to me like we can triple our volume and make less money. Is that what that's saying?
Depends on which column you're looking at. Because remember, we're bringing down some of the subsidy stuff, like the generation fee. We get that generation fee from trash.
Yeah.
So as we divert more trash from landfill, we're getting less revenue on that. So I couldn't show, I had original graphs to show the 204,000 the same, because you could look at this a couple different ways, but to be fair to how, you know, waste flows work, we want to make sure we cover that. So there are some scenarios like that. Yeah, we have less revenue coming in. We're getting more revenue on the commodity side. Our expenses are going up. You can remember, all of these are negative cash flow machines at these levels. They're, and with county employees making county benefits and all that, these are the programs that we see operate the most cost effective, either through the private sector or public sector, using community service folks and inmate labor, where they can reduce their cost on the operational side. Obviously, technology improvements, efficiency improvements all factor into that. But cost of operating is very hard to run a small facility at a profit as a standalone facility. You've got collection revenue and other sources. It's a whole different game. You do have that here. Some of my clients didn't have that. Hey, we want to build a MRF. You know, we're going to build it and it'll come to us, right? Well, I mean, here's how it would come to you, and you have to be cost effective. And if your cost per ton are more than it is to landfill, sometimes that's hard to fight that system.
In real time, do commodities generally move up at the same across the board or drop across the board? I know you did the 20% for the scenario plan. I'm just wondering about real life. Is it, we see a drop in cardboard, but we see a bump in aluminum?
They're all across the board. I mean, oil prices can affect plastic. You got Chinese that can affect fiber and plastic. You got, you know, the metals are fairly, you know, but you got
a 20% drop across the board is a fairly, or a bump up across the
the
board.
range. We wanted to cover the range just to show the risk and rewards of the highs and lows. You know, actual stuff will depend on your contracts, what you negotiate. You only have so much volume to work with and buying power, but we do want to show that spread to show what it can be and not be. And again, we look at our comparables too and see what they're getting paid. You know, we have to look with that somewhat with a grain of salt and somewhat with validity, because again, every situation is different and what they negotiate, who they're working with, brokers or not brokers. Jefferson Belmont deals directly with an end user for their fiber. They have a paper board manufacturer in their district. The trucks come off the road and they dump into 20 feet away from a slurry, the cold slurry, and make their fiber out of that. I mean, it's 20. There's no middle person, so they're getting a good deal there. But that's not typical. Yes, sir.
You began to allude to it, but we've been hearing mostly about the revenue side, fluctuation of prices, how to get the material, all like that. Can you shed some light onto the assumptions underlying the expense side?
Sure. We use the current pay scale that the district and benefit scale that the district is working, paying its employees.
So what percentage of the annual expenses are paid?
I don't have that percentage on my top of my head.
So
But we looked at what they're currently paying. We look at how many employees we think we'll need to run these facilities based on the comparables. We look at the O&M expenses from our comparables as far as what they're operating at on a cost per ton to manage their material. Again, we're looking at averages. We're not bidding this stuff out. We're not engineering a facility. This is a feasibility study, so we look at, that's how we do our projections. We look at how these current facilities are operating, what their expenses are on a per ton basis, and how many employees they need on a square foot basis, on a, you know, all of that to come up with our averages.
Buying a car based on what people are buying cars, but not necessarily a car EV. I'm confused at how we can't price a facility. There's not much difference between $3,400 a year and $10,000 a year in terms of facility, in terms of scaling up the dual stream, or even the single stream for that matter. I think until you get into the really mega works, it doesn't, capital costs are going to be the same.
I mean, I have a client, or actually just a fellow solid waste district. They have 14,000 tons they're processing.
It did have the capital costs in this slide before. I mean, I'm assuming the capital costs are factored into this
Yes, the
profit and loss.
paying off it's part of the annual operation to retire the debt for buying the new equipment and facilities.
So you don't have a sense about proportionate categories of expense?
Well, sure we do, just not shown in this table. I mean, we have all kinds of data that we have, and that's all going to be in the final report. I mean, I could have shown you 15 slides on this. We were trying to get away from me talking and you guys asking questions, but you know, we're looking at the averages. We want to be able to fall back on third-party data that shows how they operate those facilities at these tonnages, so that we can show the projections.
Numbers at your disposal, but sort of broad strokes. The annual expense is at 90% payroll, and the rest is 50% payroll, and the rest of other things. Do you have a proportionate sense of what makes up the annual expense?
I don't have it right top of my head, but I do. I've got the spreadsheets and everything that we put together. So,
But you can't sort of ballpark it right now.
no. Because I haven't run it that way. I look at the cost of operation. I use what they're paying people. So I didn't have to use what other people are paying other people. I use what people are being paid here locally and their benefits. The number of employees comes off the different sizing of facilities. That all drives the labor end of the expenses to operate the facility. And then you have your O&M and your capitalization and other expenses related to operating. The residuals, we talked about that earlier, but getting rid of material that you can't process, so on and so forth.
Also showed Sandwich for all different MRFs that do function successfully without the services that we need. What makes those tick more, not these?
Subsidies. They all operate on subsidies. Well, they're successful programs. They're all successful programs, but they all operate. Even Portage County is 14,000 tons is the highest generation fee in the state. The reason it works, and they're involved in collection too, is they have a big significant.
Rural counties that are small.
Well, sure, that's a rural county. That's a rural county, and Auglaize County is another one. I mean, they all operate on subsidies in order to make it work. That's why we wanted to be sure that the policy committee and board saw what a standalone facility would be without subsidies, as well as the two-tiered subsidies, the collection revenue, I'm calling it a subsidy, but it's revenue obtained through providing service, and then the generation fee is almost a pure subsidy that was passed as a part of the plan. Those are the two kickers that bring all of these scenarios into a profit-making scenario. But again, I want the board and the policy committee to understand those contracts are not guaranteed. If we can't keep Great University of Ohio University happy, they're going to go elsewhere. If we can't be competitive with either of those contracts in the future, you're not going to get those contracts. And without those contracts, you don't have the volume, and then you don't have a program. So it's all interrelated.
Are there facilities out there that don't just depend on one hauler to bring the materials, but have multiple
Absolutely.
haulers drop them off? Okay, so that's a scenario.
Yeah, I mean, there's open market systems, but most of those, again, are heavily subsidized because, again, without extra revenue, the revenue just for the sale of the recyclables is not going to float the boat. Now, it can if you operate, such example, Grand Rapids. Bigger facility, they operate a 15,000 ton facility with 2 county employees. That's it. And the day I was there, they were making me breakfast while the facility was running. Because they had 30 community service people out there chugging, and they had all their judges. It took them years to develop that program. All their judges that feed community service people to that program, sometimes they got 10 people there, sometimes they got 30, sometimes they got 4. But they have a big enough tip floor, they operate the facility with 2 people, I mean 2 paid people. So it's just every it's not the case here.
How big a piece of pie are the capital costs in terms of annual expenses?
That's what I was asking. We don't know.
Yeah, I can give you a range of some of the capital. This is some older stuff. But, I used the percent payback that was in the solid waste plan, which I thought was a killer deal, 2% over 20 years for the capital and of the projection for buying capital.
See, like in Ann Arbor, we have a similar lemmings jumping over the cliff situation with community service. There's a big college there, there's a volunteer. It's a tremendous resource in that.
What's that? I'm sorry.
Community service.
Yeah. You know, we've looked at that, and we didn't do that for this particular study. We've had other projects where the client wanted to use inmate labor and community service. It makes a big difference because it's a big part of your cost. I mean, on a $300,000 or $400,000 operation, you know, your employee expenses are, you know, a third of that. Can be upwards of a third of that. So, you know, anytime you can take a swipe out of one of the biggest part of your costs, you're going to save at the bottom line, and that's why we want to present these different bottom line. But that wasn't our task here to eliminate jobs. We're trying to hopefully maintain or grow jobs and look at this type of facility, because that's what they plan for. We'd already been through this process, and that's another thing I just want to keep bringing it back to. So the district went through and updated their solid waste plan and planned on doing this facility. If the board of directors believes through this study that the facility is feasible, they already have all the approvals and everything they have in place to go ahead and move forward with this project. So that's important to know. This isn't like we're thinking we want to do this and we're going to put in our solid waste plan. What do you all think? This was done already a couple of years ago. This was just to make sure it was just a second look. Is it feasible or not? And the answer is kind of a mixed answer, which is kind of where we get to our next section. Which
Does it keep the same amount of employees? Is that assumed?
No, it's way less. I mean, you can run this with one person. Now, operationally, you still have collection, which requires people to drive trucks and things, and so on and so forth. But these transfer station operations are pretty simple. You just dump it on the ground, put it back up in a bigger container, and off it goes. No processing, all single stream, mix it together, and let a regional facility process it for you.
It's got a wonderful net at the end. I mean,
In any of these dollar costs, did you throw in any variables for if you got land donated or if you bought used equipment or used already existing equipment to adjust?
In these
to make
numbers,
this
no.
more feasible?
What we do is we allude to that you can reduce your capital outlay through donated land. If you use the existing facility, existing property, and structures, and you'll probably not be able to use the structures, but existing property, you don't have to go out and buy new property. That would save money. These examples were to build a new facility somewhere else from the existing operation. Because that's the worst case scenario. Anything else will just improve the bottom line by either reducing your capital outlay or reducing other expenses. And we allude to that in our report. Those are things to consider. The board wanted to look at possible siting of a new facility, and we proposed on that, but they did not enlist us to look at that.
Are there other districts that have like our non-profit that's publicly owned and or solid waste?
Now, well, I can't speak for the entire state, but I would say this is a very unique situation here. But there are other nonprofits that are work intimately with their solid waste districts. The Coshocton, Fairfield, Liberty, and Paulding, our Perry district, they work very closely with Lancaster Recycling, which is a nonprofit.
Are there
Adams Brown.
employees
Adams Brown. There's
on are they public employees or not?
no, they just receive subsidy funding from the district. So this is very unique in the way it's structured here. You know, I had some thoughts, you know, that aren't germane to what I'm doing here as far as, I used to be a director of a solid waste authority, so I've kind of seen it both ways. And I had some thoughts on that, but that's not none of my business. That's not what I'm here for. But, you know, there are some duplications of governance going on, but, you know, again, there's reasons for that, and that's none of my business. That's not why I'm here. But yeah, this is pretty unique. It's unique for a district to be involved in the trash collection. It's not exclusive. There are other districts that are involved in trash collection. More of them are involved on the recycle side because they're filling the gap in that maybe the private sector is not fulfilling. Such as my Jefferson Development, they have over 200 recycling sites. There's no way, there would be no private sector would provide that for the residential sector and the institutional sector. They might do cardboard for the commercial sector, which they do in areas, but they would not do that in that district. And so the district, the Jefferson Development, they fill that void. And they have to meet goals and objectives from the state. So. Other questions?
I just want to try one thing. With your generation fleet, you have, as more trash gets diverted from the going to keep on going up, and that should include more materials, and in fact, more revenue generation.
There are scenarios, yep, you could do that.
Just making sure, is that you were talking about?
If I read this right, forget about the collection revenue, forget about the generation fee. If I compare these scenarios with what's happening now, a whole lot of improvement. I mean, we're losing 57% out of operations right now.
Without the other subsidy.
That's what I'm saying, without the collection revenue, without the generation. And almost 58% of, lead cash right now. And I'm looking down the column really fast. Most of those numbers are improved over currently.
Even if you just look at the first scenario, which is the current recycling tonnage, using a modern facility, except for the low revenue scenario, the bottom line improvement, just as a standalone facility, is upwards, 20% improvement in the bottom line without looking at your collection revenue. As you go further out in these scenarios, it becomes foggier and foggier, and that's what projections are all. I mean, we all would understand that. So to me, I look at reality. The current scenario with the 3,400 ton, that's reality. That's what they have contracts for, at least till June of 14. That's what they're operating at now. Everything after that is assumptions, and it gets foggier as you go deeper into the assumptions.
There's also the idea to switch to single stream that maybe more people would recycle.
Absolutely.
Or the industrial clients find it more attractive.
And we talked about in the collections, I'll tell you that if you go single stream with carts, so you make it easier for the resident to participate, you will get a bump of 10, 15, 20% just because of the carts and the single stream.
And even if you
Don't even change anything else in the city of Athens. Don't change anything other than go to carts and single stream. You will increase the diversion.
What is that, cart you're saying?
Like the wheeled carts. You go from, right now it's a 30-gallon container, they're the $12 price, and 230 gallons for, you give them a 60 or 90 gallon, 96 gallon tote on the recycle side, and you give them like a 48 on the trash side. Now all of a sudden, it's very easy for them. On the recycle, they just have bags and bins, right? 18-gallon bins. So they have an 18-gallon bin right now in the city of Athens. Give them a 96-gallon cart. I got communities up in Cuyahoga County, that's what they're going. They went from 64 to 96 gallon on the recycle side. Now they're picking up every other week. They're not picking up weekly. They don't have to pick up every week. But that, just going to that system, which require automated trucks, it's a whole nother scenario of collection. You go to automated trucks, the one-arm trucks, or the flippers on the back of a manual truck, and you go to the carts, because it's too hard for someone to lift. You will get a bump in recycling just because of the system you use. You don't change anything else. Keep the same amount of materials that you accept, just change the cart, change the system to single stream and to a cart, you'll get an increase. And those, again, can be some of how you grow this program without changing the contracts, other than changing how they're billed for or whatever. Without adding any more programs, you could have growth. You could have 10, 20% growth just because of going to a different system of collection. But that's another capital campaign to change those trucks are $250,000 a piece for the one-arm trucks. A little less if you use a rear load with the flipper on the back, but then you need 2 people on a truck instead of 1. I tell this to everybody, you look at a pie of cost for collection or for solid waste management. 60% of that cost is collection. That's the bigger fish to fry. The other part's processing and disposal costs, 40 or less percent. So the industry, Rumpke, Waste Management, others, counties, districts, they're looking at the biggest cost that they have, which is collection. And anytime you can improve that efficiency, you can drop your bottom line as well. So, but it takes money to spend. You know, spend money to do that. They're expensive trucks, and they're hard.
But it's common for other businesses to start up around collection and they're separate processes.
Yeah, as long as there's a market for them to take material to, you gotta have a market. Okay, any other questions? So we look at our recommendations, conclusions, and we do this graph just kind of it's a risk-reward proposition we're trying to look at here. So obviously the bigger facility, the more equipment, the higher risk, the higher reward. The reorg may not always be economic, especially on a standalone facility. The reward would be more recycling, more programming for your residents and businesses. The transfer station or smaller MRF, less risk, less reward, but still service capability. So that's kind of the philosophy we look at when we design our recommendations. So we come up with 3 basic recommendations: a high risk and reward, a shared risk and reward, and a low risk and reward. The first one being the high risk reward, which is to develop a 6,000 ton facility at least. You're going to need $250,000 to $400,000 of additional revenue to make a positive cash flow proposition that come from your collection revenue and generation fee. Clearly, it can come from that. We've shown that. Your collection revenues are competitive contracts, so they're not a guarantee. You have to take that in consideration. I would want to have those contracts locked up before I spend a couple $1 million in a facility, but I'm not signing the checks. But you all need to know, or the board needs to know, what their risks are in this proposition. It's certainly feasible with those collection contracts and the generation fee, clearly. The exact profit loss number will change based on whether you build it on the current site, whether you get the greatest and slickest baler, or you get a used one. I mean, there's all kinds of things that factor in to designing that facility and building it out. Again, I want to emphasize those collection contracts. The city and the university are major stakeholders in this process. They need to be at the table. They are at the table through the policy committee and others and other mechanisms, so that's very important. Obviously, you can evaluate existing structures. There will be more detail in the report, but from a slide, these are things to consider. How are you going to subsidize this facility, make a cash flow? You have good options. There are other districts that don't have these options. You have good options, but there is risk there. Those contracts aren't guaranteed past June of 2014. The other scenario would go to look at the transfer station, less capital investment. The capital investment or the cash flow needed to make it a positive return falls into the range of what your generation fee would provide for you, and obviously your collection revenue on top of that. And so there's less risk, there's less capital. You could use your existing facilities. They have to be modified. There'd be a process you go through to bid that out for the processing of that material, and how you did a revenue sharing program and move that material out of the district to a regional processor. So those are, to maintain your current programs now and be able to process and or at least handle that material in the form that your market wants, which is, the university wants single stream, from what I understand, whether the city does or not. Certainly that would improve their program. It's to have single stream or at least a good dual stream. So that's less risk, less reward. It's kind of a shared risk because you're working with both the private and public sector on this. Going down this process, obviously we'll need as many employees, especially on the processing side. For the transfer station, we need hardly any. You still have collection employees. So those are things for the board to consider. Do they want, they have a union contract? I mean, just signed. So those are things they all have to take in consideration.
Transfer 2, where's the closest place that we send that to?
I mean, there's a couple facilities. I mean, obviously Columbus is where the district takes its commingled recyclables now. There's other places as well. I mean,
Winchester,
Pittsburgh,
Columbus, Akron, Pittsburgh, Cincinnati.
You send material in a big enough truck. These places want the material. It's a volume-based system. I mean, there is a limit to how far they'll transport, but it's all about volume. They're investing millions of dollars. I mean, Rumpke's investing millions of dollars in their facility. Allied or Republic is investing millions up in Oberlin. I mean, these things are capital, and especially for these higher tonnage type operations, very capital intensive pieces, and they need volume to satisfy those debts and to move the material. So that might be an option. And then of course the status quo option is just stay where you're at and try to make minor improvements and don't do the facility. So that's kind of where we've settled out. We hope with the proposal that the report that we've generated, we've given the board and the policy committee enough information that they can make a decision. It's not going to be an easy decision for them to make because there are some things they don't control. There's things they do control and there's things they don't control. And those all have to be taken into consideration when you're going to go and make commitments for capital investment. So
is this final plan going to be like online somewhere so it's possible to look at it?
When we send it, it'll become public information and it can be distributed from there.
Where?
It's going to go to the policy committee first, which
February.
on February 20th, we will present the final report to the policy committee, and then on March 4th, we will present it to the board of directors. But at that point, it'll become public.
So they're the ones ultimately making the decision, the community, the people have a chance to still weigh in on, you know, on those. This is the forum.
Well, and of course, there was multiple forums during the planning process too, because this was a major part. This was a major
So if
initiative.
anybody couldn't make it tonight or who's interested in this.
Well, they can always submit comments. I mean, it's, you know,
Where do they submit comments to?
to the district, Roger, would be the appropriate one.
But it does seem like if people don't have all of the information yet, like how those annual costs were put together, that they can't give adequate comment tonight to say like, well, we have more questions about this assumption or that assumption. So I don't know how people can do that unless they have that information before it's.
There's also a lot of people really, I think that really are interested in this, and need to have a chance to have their shot.
Sure. Yeah, and that's up for the board. I mean, they said they want to do 2 public comment periods or 2 public meetings. That's what we're doing. If they want to take, you know, if the board wants to take this report and put it on their website and have an additional 30-day comment period, I mean, that would be up for them to decide. It's not for me to decide. I mean, we're following the process that they scoped out and we proposed on. But they may ultimately, because they're hearing that, they may ultimately decide, you know what, here's the report. Take a look at it, long look at it.
I don't know about Hocking County, but Athens County wants to move forward on this stuff. They really did. And again, it's been held back because there's just a few local people kind of subverting the whole thing, kind of. It's, to some degree, there's some good reason behind that, but I think in our area here, we'd like to try to move this forward.
No, I get it from, I sat with your boss at another conference, and he's looking for the district to step up. I mean, I heard that loud and clear. Because they have a very proactive program, and they want to grow that program. And so, you know, the market's what drives what your capability of growing that program is, and right now you've got to recycle and process some of the material because they can't take it all. So that's a limiting factor to your program.
As a new member of the district, you know, like, I would think that any decision that's going to be made is going to take a lot. If we make any decision, I mean, what do you?
There won't be any decision made by anytime soon. Once the report's done, we'll get it on the district website, we'll get it on the commissioner's website, so you can go to your site and comment on it. We all have to digest it. And having seen 2 versions of this now, I still have several questions to ask them on. So I guarantee you know, until we get to the final one, we're going to all be asking questions. So it's going to be quite a while before we make a decision.
Yeah, I mean, it's a living document. I mean, we're in the process of developing this. I mean, it's fairly structured, but it's still living.
Once this document's out there, people know it's out there and where they can go, so that it's not a secret.
This was never intended to be a secret, I can guarantee you. This is just part of the process that we're going through.
They would do it as earlier, so I'm sure it will happen. But we'll make sure that it's publicized.
Any other questions? Good questions, good discussion. I mean, we got it all, we're capturing, we're doing minutes from the Hocking meeting as well as here. These will be distributed to the board, and that process will continue on. I mean, this is a living document and a process we're going through, and this is all part of it. It's an important part of it. As we stated, there's many stakeholders. The stakeholders for this whole thing is not only the district as a whole, the county commissioners, the political subdivision, the commercial businesses, institutional facilities, existing private sector MRFs in the region, the waste haulers, the processing, university. It's all, there's a lot of stakeholders involved in this process. And so that makes it hard for the commissioners, you know, that's a big decision to make on what they want to do.
Now, the district we're talking about is Hocking, Athens County. Now, I don't understand how that these districts are formed, but is it at all possible that you can enlarge the district and make this Banks County and maybe other counties to make it a
I mean, the director right now of Ohio EPA wants to do that. They're in a review process of looking at the House Bill 592. And his goal is not to have 52 solid waste districts representing 88 counties. His goal is to have 8 districts representing 88 counties. So that would make districts about 11 or 12 counties each. These districts formed through a very brilliant piece of legislation back in 1988, and counties married and divorced over the years, but they settled into this 52 that we have now. And that was a very open and public process, and there's reasons why districts are together and reasons why districts are apart. And it's going to be interesting to see how the director of EPA is going to get to 8. You can change one thing in the law, and that'll get them to 8. Just change the population requirement. Change it from 125 to 350, and boom, you got 8 or something, in that range. But that takes all the local decision making, which form districts, and that we're working with Larry Long and Brad Cole at the CCAO, and it's going to be a fight. Yes. I'm sorry. Lots of acronyms in this business.
But with the solid waste board, Athens Hocking Solid Waste Board, it's made up of the 3 Athens commissioners and the 3 Hocking commissioners. And it takes 4 to make a decision. And I'll just use a small example. Today I had a situation that ended up being 3 and 3. 3 Hocking on one side, 3 Athens on the other. So it makes it challenging sometimes to get things to change.
What was the decision? What was the decision?
What was it? I wanted to expand
trash collection.
expand trash and curbside recycling in Athens County. In some areas I'm not going right
The
now.
Athens County, look for it.
So it can't be done because Hocking County doesn't want us to do it.
Well, I just want you to know that there's a reality. There's 6 people. We need 4.
They can be done, it's just gonna take us some.
But the EP, in the meantime, we have an approved plan. Jim mentioned. We have to follow that 5-year plan, and it says we're going to upgrade and renovate our MRF.
And if it doesn't,
If it don't happen,
Then you
I'm
have
going
to
to hear
redo
from
your
them a
plan.
lot.
so there's a cost associated and an exercise associated with that. And if you don't implement your plan as written, with variances, but as written, implementing a facility, if you don't do that, then you've got to go back and redo your plan. It's a material change in circumstance, more than likely. The board makes that final decision if it's a material change or not, but it probably would be if you have a major component of your plan that you're going to do and you don't do it. So there's a lot of things for the board to consider. And you got to understand, the board of directors, which is the county commissioners, they implement the solid waste plan. The policy committee, which is a representation of both counties, they write the plan and they create and abolish fees. They don't manage the district. Roger answers to the board of directors. They hire, fire, and can do contracts. The policy committee only writes the plan and does fees. They can make recommendations to the board, but they don't implement the solid waste plan that they wrote. That's the check and balance. They write the plan, commissioners implement it. The commissioners have to decide. They can't implement the plan that the policy committee wrote, then they have to determine whether or not that's a material change, like I was saying. And if it is, they have to rewrite. They then will tell the board of commissioners will tell the policy committee, you need to rewrite the plan, which is a whole process. So, a lot of chips on the table.